So welcome, Chris Demchak. I'm really very keen to listen to your presentation, and I'm sure that the audience is doing either.
Thank you very much. What I want to do is
You are now muted.
follow on one of the comments that was made in the previous panel by Sergey Epp, that we needed to focus on the foundation. I'm going to take that a step further and make an argument that we can't just focus, we have to build on something. And I'm going to make a point to you that today we need a collective operational cyber defense, and that we can do it. It is feasible and it's urgent. And I will end with a suggestion on one I'm working on called the Cyber Operational Resilience Alliance. I think we have to understand that the world has changed, and cyber's insecurities is a phenomenal contribution to why the distribution of power and influence in this world moved away from us. And we have to adapt. We know that cyber can have strategic effects without risking conflict. We have to recognize that we built this extraordinarily insecure substrate and we spread it everywhere, giving offense advantages to everyone and changing the systemic surprise in all of our own complex systems. And authoritarian adversaries, notably China, have exploited it. We created a new kind of conflict, cyber conflict, which is in part and parcel because we in the democracies have been fragmented and delayed in the response to these insecurities. And now we've created what I'm calling great systems conflict. This is the rise of the peer states that are actually arguing and conflicting across cyberspace using cyber means. We're also creating borders in cyberspace. So we're trying desperately to defend ourselves as individual democracies. And a better way to define this is as jurisdictions, right? And so as a consequence, we need to build something across the democracies. And organizations here are critical, not talking. And I argue, and I will show you at the end, a Cyber Operational Resilience Alliance, I call it CORA, that needs to be built, that includes our private sector and allows us to protect ourselves in the near term as we build more strongly in the long term. All right, first off, let's just get some history done. Cyberspace, 2010, this is the kind of picture I would have shown you straight out of Wikipedia. Very clean, very neat, easy to see. Here's 2021. The same picture is covered with clouds, but they're not just clouds, they're commercial private clouds in which the programming itself is not obvious to those of us who are looking at it in the outside. Another picture, 2010, we would have talked about the various stacks, the machine stacks, the internet stack. Up here, we would have talked about the autonomous systems of BGP. Today, we have to talk about a completely different, not completely different, but a much more complex set of stacks that are virtual. Yes, we have the physical and digital infrastructure down here, but now we have cloud computing owned largely by commercial firms, and in between are virtualized items, software, and then they go up to all the connected devices that we have. And of course, we have to care about whether they're hybrid clouds, and artificial intelligence is changing this, as well as quantum computing or computation in this case. Another kind of stack we have to worry about now is what's called the artificial intelligence stack. It has different things in there: massive data management, decision supports, but machine learning, and all the forms of different kinds of computation that before were buried or in research. Before, in 2010, we would talk about these lovely cable networks, and still 98% of the global internet runs through these networks. But at that time, it was pretty easy to follow them. Now, this is what it looks like. Now it's complex. Everyone is building them. Google is building their own. We have a different world where it's moving away from the hands of the democracies. And what are the democracies doing? Well, they're doing what the adversaries are doing. We're creating jurisdictions. We are trying to make ourselves individually defensible and defended. And part of the reason we're doing that is we have been losing 1 to 2% of our GDP annually to cyber insecurity. That's not sustainable, by the way. So what's happening? The future is coming very, very fast. A lot has been said about the China Belt and Road program, but now we have the China, of course, the digital Belt and Road, and we're seeing them throughout the world. The Chinese scale allows them to be in places that they couldn't have been before, right? And that scale allows them to change the world, whether we want them to do it or not. There's another picture. This comes out of some Australian researchers, the 7 major firms of China, and what they're involved in all over the world. So whether you want them to do something or not, they have the means to be at the bottom of that stack and change the world around you. And these are the kinds of things they're involved in. Smart cities, surveillance, and all sorts of data centers, particularly data centers, cables, all sorts of they're positioning on a lot of cables, satellite calibration centers. Their Chinese version of GPS, Baidu, is, of course, now present throughout the world. And curiously enough, the satellite likes to geoposition above the capitals of other countries. Their westernized influence that we used to have is declining as they spread out. In 2006, only one firm amongst the largest telecommunications firms were Chinese. By 2014, 4 of the 7 were Chinese. 2020, Huawei is clearly the largest telecommunication vendor globally, and Chinese firms are beginning, you might say they are beginning to own a continent, Africa, where Huawei has built at least 70 4G networks, and it's holding them hostage for 5G, and China Mobile is absolutely dominant. Now we know that the Chinese government has actually decided now it's time for them to have a new internet, not one that enables a free and open internet, but one where you have to register to use it and you can be shut off. And still, we're not listening. This is a wonderful headline from CNET. China has big ideas for the internet, but too bad nobody likes them. Well, who exactly is no one? All of Africa, the Middle East, good part of Asia, they seem to like it just fine. A couple of years ago, a colleague and I, Yuval Shavit from the University of Tel Aviv, we did some research on BGP hijacking through China Telecom. Very nice. At that time, China Telecom had 10 points of presence inside North America. Now they have over 2,500 points of presence throughout the world. This kind of behavior is absolutely possible anywhere that they're present. So whose preferences will actually dominate this future cyber world that we're talking about? Whose preferences will dominate its governance and the control in each of these layers? Will it be us? No. Will we be able to control who is doing it? Well, one thing we have to look at is the fact that we may not even have the funds to compete if we do not combine our funds in some way. And we anticipated that Chinese economy would equal the U.S. economy by 2030, maybe somewhere around then. So good argument to be made that in 2014, it already equaled the U.S. economy by using GDP, PPP measures. And by 2019, it was already 20% larger. And this was before the losses of coronavirus. So we have to adapt to this reality. And in this reality, the Chinese scale and coherence is absolutely going to defeat any single one of the democracies that you live in or you like. We are, in the world terms, a minority community. We have preferences, and the rest of the world is not sharing them. So we need to think about what future we want. Do we want the future we're going to have if we do nothing? Do we want the future that we're going to have if each of us makes our own jurisdictions in cyberspace and desperately tries to defend? What I call it the difference between rising vassaldom and some more slowly rising vassaldom. We can't go back to where we were. We'll never have that ability. But what we can do is we can make our systemically across our community, we can make the strategic coherence and achieve the scale necessary to resist and actually provide an alternative model. So what we need is a new narrative. We have to recognize we're a minority community, and we have 3 operational goals, not talk, but operational goals. The first one is that we scale up, and we have the people to do that. We have at least 1 billion people that we can bring into this. And we bring in our private sector. And this becomes our democratic IT. Thank you, Sandro, for that title. That becomes our community, our democratic IT. And we buy time immediately. We start collectively defending, of course, it's sharing information, but with our private sector inside the tent. Now, what does the private sector get from this? You do not have to, inside the tent, you don't have to compete head-to-head with the Huaweis of the world. You can compete internationally as you like. You can export internationally as you like. Huawei cannot own parts of that stack inside the tent. And finally, absolutely not the least item, the most important item is on a wartime level of investment. We have to transform the underlying substrate, the underlying very shoddy cyberspace we began with, and on which all of your artificial intelligence and everything else is going to rest. We have to transform it into what we meant it to be. So we need the kind of R&D across universities, labs, and firms to change it into that securable substrate we meant for it to be. And only then can we turn to the rest of the world and say democracy can be prosperous, vigorous, and united, and provide an alternative counterstory to the China model. Now, at the moment, I'm working on a piece of research. I know there are many ideas about how we correlate, how we can come together collectively. But I'm working on a model that was built on the 5 offense advantages that we originally gave to the world and caused the problem from the start with the shoddy cyberspace. And this is the cyber conflict model. And what I'm working on right now is a cyber operational resilience alliance that is inserted into the model, and it begins to break these connections for us. Right? And I'm happy to talk about that if you'd like to. But in the meantime, let me come to the end. This is our reality. There's no assured future for us in this deeply cybered, authoritarian world of great systems conflict unless we hang together. And as Franklin said, if we don't hang together across allies and even internally, we will most certainly hang separately. Okay. And thank you very much. I'm open to any questions.
Thank you so much, Chris, for this very inspiring presentation that provided us with a lot of food for thought. Maybe one quick question back to you, as you recently warned against a split of the US Cyber Command from the NSA, that you warned that would create silos and is not a good idea. Can you briefly tell us why it isn't a good idea?
Why silos are not a good idea. This is the question?
Exactly. Because we have the same situation.
Try to imagine why silos would be a good idea under these circumstances. If I understand, are you talking about silos within the community of democracies? Because fundamentally, we share more in terms of values, in terms of the rule of law, in terms of our expectations, than we do not share. And we are a minority community. I mean, if you look across the world, we spent 70 years telling ourselves we ran the rest of the world, and we did not turn them into consolidated democracies. We are bizarrely sui generis, and we share values that are markedly different than the rest of the world. It makes us hard to, easy to kill and hard to defend sometimes. So silos, when you have a silo, operationally,
hey Brooks, welcome.
Thank you so much, Chris. And that was a statement. Silos are really still a problem in the cybersecurity world. And Chris Demchak's vantage point is the perfect connecting passage in terms of how scale can defeat scale in terms of cybersecurity and cyber attacks. And new technologies will play an increasingly important role in the future to achieve this goal.